Over the last 6 months, I have filled up my old Commonplace book and I am about to start a brand new one. The point is to use the Commonplace book as a tool in your intellectual life, where what you're doing is recording those ideas that you think are interesting or useful and that you're going to want to revisit later. So in this video, I want to go through 7 tips on how to keep a Commonplace book, which I have learned over doing this for quite a few years at this point. First, you need to choose the right tool. Both physical and digital Commonplace books have advantages and disadvantages. I think that a physical Commonplace book allows you the benefit of writing things by hand, and that itself is an advantage because writing by hand is linked to information retention. So by writing something by hand, you are actually helping yourself remember it. That's the main reason that I actually keep a physical Commonplace book. But if you have a digital Commonplace book, it's going to be really easy to find what you've written. You never have to cycle through different notebooks, and you don't have to do anything like creating an index, which I will talk about in just a moment. Let me make 2 quick recommendations about tools. If you are looking to start a digital Commonplace book, I think the best tool is Obsidian. Obsidian allows linking and tagging in notes, and Obsidian is totally free. It has a really robust community with lots of plugins, and if you're interested in digital note-taking, it really is, I think, the best option out there right now. If you are keeping a physical Commonplace book though, I think you should use something like this. This is a little field notes notebook. It's only about 48 pages. It's really tiny, which means that it's really portable. Which brings us to the second piece of advice, which is that you should carry your Commonplace book with you. I've been using this notebook for only like a week or so. I love this thing, and I especially love it because it can fit in my back pocket. Now, I don't carry a backpack, so having a really small and portable notebook, it turns out, is pretty essential. The reason I say that you want to carry your Commonplace book with you is just that you never know when you're going to encounter an idea that you're going to want to place in your Commonplace book. Don't miss out on an opportunity. You never know when you're going to find a good idea or when you're going to just hear a turn of phrase, something written on a plaque at a museum or something in a book that you're browsing in a bookstore. You just never know when something is going to strike you. And that's the kind of thing that you want to put in a notebook like this. Of course, if you're using Obsidian, that means you are either going to want to use your Notes app or you can use Obsidian's mobile app. I don't use a lot of digital tools for note-taking, to be honest. I've tried to use Obsidian's app before. I can't tell you anything about that, but maybe I'll link to a guide or 2 that I find on YouTube. That'll be in the description down below as well. Now, one of the things that I struggle with as a reader is that I only read books in English. And I've been trying to expand my reading horizons by learning a new language, which brings me to today's sponsor, Lingoda. Now, Lingoda is not your ordinary language learning app. Instead, Lingoda is actually an online language school. By signing up for Lingoda, you get access to accessible and live classes. In these classes, a native level teacher is teaching a small group, so it's just 3 to 5 people. So at most, it's you and 4 other students. And these classes range from beginner to advanced, and they offer many different languages like English, French, German, Spanish, and I believe a special class for business English. I recently signed up for Lingoda and I have started to study German. With Lingoda, that means that I have access to a teacher who actually knows what they're talking about and can actually focus on me in each of those classes. I don't have to compete with too many other students for attention. For a limited period of time, Lingoda is offering a 30-day language sprint. So if you sign up, you can save $25. And then if you complete enough classes, you will actually earn cash back or credits for future classes. One of the key things when you're learning a language is consistency. If you can take classes even every single day, you're going to learn that language a lot faster. And Lingoda is actually offering you a real incentive to take more classes, to study harder, and then that means that you can continue your study and save some money. Now, if you're interested in Lingoda, and I really think you should be, use my link down below to sign up. And make sure you use the discount code Jared. That's Jared. Use that link down below. Use the code Jared. So thank you again to Lingoda for sponsoring this video. All right, tip number 3 is that when in doubt, you should write it down. I think that some people view putting a quote or an idea in their Commonplace book as like a compliment that they're paying to that idea. And they start wondering about putting too much in their Commonplace books, or they start thinking that they need to be really selective. And I think that that is a habit that you just need to break. You don't know what ideas are actually good or worthwhile or are going to be interesting to you later on. And a good Commonplace book should just be a repository for those ideas which might end up being good or useful or interesting later. But since you don't know what's going to be good or useful or interesting until much later, you just need to capture whatever you can here. So basically, anytime I think to myself, that seems interesting, I try to write it down in this notebook. That means probably I'm writing in it maybe 3 to 4 times a day. Some people will write a lot less, some people will write a lot more, but the point is, don't act as a gatekeeper to your own commonplace book. This is for you. It's a tool for your own thinking, and you shouldn't be worried about doing it right or making sure that the ideas all are really impressive before you write them down. Number 4 is something that I was not doing for a long time, and it became really annoying, and that is to actually add references or citations to your commonplace book. These don't need to conform to Chicago or MLA or some other kind of style guide, but at the very minimum, you should write down the name of the author, the title of the book, and the page number. You'll probably be able to remember which edition you read, so writing down the edition or the publisher isn't really necessary. What you're doing by adding citations really is just making it easier for you to go back and find that quote in context, because eventually you're going to want to review this stuff, and then maybe you're going to want to go back to that book and reread it to make sure that you really understood it. For instance, I wrote down a quote from Carl Jung in his book Man and His Symbols in this notebook, and all I did at the end was just write Carl Jung, Man and His Symbols, page 4. I know what edition of that book I have on my shelf. I don't need to worry about those kinds of details, but that's going to make it really easy for me to go back and find the relevant quote from Jung if for some reason I ever need to use it in some writing, or I'm just wondering about how some ideas connect together. Basically, adding references makes it easier for you later, so do a little bit of work right now. It's pretty easy, it's not very strenuous, and then you will thank yourself later when you're going back and reviewing. Number 5 is to create an index. This really only applies if you're using a physical commonplace book. If you're using something like Obsidian, then the tag functionality, I think, essentially creates the index for you. But if you are keeping a physical commonplace book, then I would recommend using the first page or two as an index. Because I haven't been using this very long, I haven't created the index yet. But you can see that on the very first page, I've actually left it blank for the index. Now, there are some guides to creating a good index for your commonplace book on YouTube. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it better than some of these other people. Again, those videos are going to be linked down below. Basically, the index helps you find the quotes in your commonplace book without having to look through the whole thing. And then you find the references that you added to all of your quotes, which means you can go back and find them in the books. Everything that we're doing here is just about making it easy for us to actually use the information that we've written down in our commonplace books. My 6th piece of advice is a bit of a meta point, but that's to be flexible. This is my 3rd video about commonplace books that I've made on this channel. Every time I've done things a little bit differently. Basically, what's happening is that as I keep a commonplace book, I'm just iterating and making small changes to my methods each time. I used to use a really highly structured method. I now have moved away from that highly structured method. I've now added an index. I've just done some things to make my practice of keeping a commonplace book work for me. Because we're allowing ourselves to be flexible, it also means that when we're starting to keep commonplace books, so if you've never kept one before but you want to start keeping one now, you don't have to worry about getting it right or being perfect the very first time. Because actually what you're going to do is just start, you're going to figure out what works for you, and then you're going to make some changes based on what didn't work for you. And after you've gone through 1 or 2 notebooks, your practice of a commonplace book might look radically different than mine. And that's okay. A commonplace book is a tool for thought. And you need to figure out what tools you need for the kind of work that you want to do. And then my final piece of advice is to revisit your commonplace book regularly. Not just the book that you've been using currently, but all of those old commonplace books. If you're like me, eventually you're going to have a drawer full of these things. You want to just spend some time every once in a while. Once a week, once a month, a couple times a year. Figure out what works for you. And just go through and read them. Figure out what ideas were striking you in the summer of 2019, or what ideas seemed most salient or important to you last winter. And you do that by looking through your commonplace book. Your commonplace book, in a way, starts to help you understand the narrative of your life a little bit better, because you can see the sorts of things that were drawing your attention, the kinds of things that interested you. Sometimes you're going to be reminded of something that you found so exciting when you wrote it down, but you've somehow forgotten. By revisiting these notebooks, we're actually allowing ourselves to revisit these ideas, and these ideas are so interesting that they're probably always worth revisiting.